Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I know this is probably the worst time ever to give a talk right before lunch where everyone wants to just go eat. So I'll try to be quick to let everyone get going, but also please feel free to make this interactive, ask questions in the Zoom chat. Like I'm here to answer anything or to do my best to educate on the research that we've been doing recently. So what I wanted to talk about today was the single most frequently asked question I get right now, the future of work. What is going to happen? It's the foremost question on everyone's mind. And I want to take us through sort of the process that we've been thinking about, all the research that's going on, and really come to sort of a conclusion, our best guess about where the situation is going. Problem with Zoom is that you see yourself in here and then you see all your hair everywhere. Sorry. So let's get to it. What is the question? Working from home. Is it working? Is it not working? That's me working from home with Henry, the cutest dog in the world. It's clearly working for him. I'm not sure it's working for me, but it's definitely working for him. And are you shirking from home? Are you working or are you shirking? Are you sleeping? Are you doing yoga? Or do you have crying children? Do you have, again, the cutest dog in the world, Henry, staring at you over your computer screen? What is working for you? I mean, you guys yourselves, a lot of you are still working from home, and a lot of your employees are all working from home. So it's this really confusing question of does it work or not? So let's start to look at what we know and what we don't know from the data about whether working from home works. There was a study done on C-Trip, which is a Chinese travel agency company, and it has 16,000 employees. It's NASDAQ listed. And it did a 9-month study of working from home versus in the office. Call center employees volunteered to work from home, and they were randomly assigned to either work from home or in the office for 9 months. And they determined that home working led to a 13% increase in performance overall. And breaking that research down, what they determined was that 9.5% of the increase in productivity was down to home employees working more hours. They started on time, they were unhampered by traffic, the usual excuse that I use. They took fewer breaks, less gossiping at the water cooler. I go on dailymail.com, can't help myself. And they had fewer days off sick. The other 3.5% was an increase because they took more calls per minute. The conclusion was that this quiet working environment allowed them to concentrate a lot more, to sort of move quicker through the calls, and a fact that anyone who's been on a call center floor in a busy day can appreciate the sound difference. And what's more, they found is that working from home led to a higher job satisfaction, and the working from home group was 50% less likely to leave than their colleagues who stayed in the office. And it just, from that study, it seems like a no-brainer, right? Interestingly, though, actually, after a 9-month trial, half of those who work from home chose to go back to the office. The peace and quiet of home can very quickly feel like isolation to some people, myself included. But due to the success of the experiment, C-Trip rolled out the option to working from home for the whole firm and allowed all the experimental employees to reselect between home and office, and half switched over, which led to gains from working from home almost doubling to 22% after those who didn't want to work from home moved back. So that sort of really what that showed is that choice is key, that some people like to work from home and some people don't. But there's a little bit more to this study that isn't quite as clear as one would hope. So something sort of important is missing, and I apologize. We're going to have to take a step back into the statistics a little bit, so bear with me, but they should be not too miserable for people who hated statistics in school. Let's take an example of why there was an issue with C-Trip in this study. So Time Magazine does a person of the century. I would say every century, but they've only been doing it one century. So they've done it once. But what they did was they asked all their readers, put out online, everything, who do you think should be the person of the century? And they asked people to vote. And there were the regular contenders. There was Albert Einstein, we all know who that is, Jesus, Adolf Hitler, I know that's a South Park something. I don't, whatever. Most people know who that is. But there was one person who I will admit, I didn't even know who this was. I don't know why I say I didn't even know, like that matters. But anyway, I had no clue who this was. And I'm not sure, do any of you guys know who this is? Any thoughts, any ideas? If you do, are you potentially from Turkey? You would think that for the person of the century, when all these other four characters are so recognizable, that this person would be too. You'd have some idea who the person was. And it turns out that it is Mustafa Ataturk. He was a write-in candidate, not even one of the people that Time listed as someone you could vote on. And he was the founder of the modern secular Turkish Republic. And he won by a margin of 500%. He was number uno in terms of the person of the century, which is kind of odd, right? Not to say he didn't do great things, but it wouldn't be who you would expect a bunch of people who read Time magazine to pick, because I had no idea who he was. How did that happen? It turned out that newspapers in Turkey for months leading up to this would put ads every day telling people to go and vote and write in Mustafa Ataturk as the write-in candidate for person of the century. Over and over. I mean, the advertising was insane around it. So Time magazine decided to rethink this once they figured out what had happened, and Albert Einstein ended up being the person of the century. But what it shows us is that when you have the wrong sample, right? So when your group that you're looking at is the wrong sample, which it was, because this had clearly been really pushed in Turkey, and there was one candidate that was pushed way more than others, that things really don't work out. The data doesn't tell you what it's supposed to tell. Knowing what the sample is, who's doing the study, who's in the study, is really important, what data you're looking at. And we'll look at one more example of that. This is the Tom Cruise debacle. I'm not sure if everyone remembers this, but that's when he jumped around on Oprah's couch. It was highly discussed in the media as to what happened. Did he go crazy? What happened? Who knows? And a magazine called Parade Magazine did a poll. And who's to say what's normal? Jumping on couches may be normal for you. I don't know. But they wanted to say, who's to say what's normal? And they did a poll. They said, is Tom to blame or is the media to blame? Do they make him crazy? And it turned out that the poll returned that 84% of people believe the media is at fault. Tom Cruise, it's not his fault. He didn't do anything wrong. The media made him do it. Okay, well, that's what your data is telling you. 84% of people believe the media is at fault. But when you look a little bit closer at who the sample is, who's answering this study, who's doing this study, you learn that 14,000 of the 18,000 votes came from the same 10 computers, and 8,400 votes came from one computer. And it happened that a bunch of these computers were located in a cafe right next to the headquarters of the Church of Scientology. So you start to realize that maybe not everybody thinks that Tom isn't to blame and that it's all the media's fault. So again, what this just illustrates is how important the sample is, how important it is who you're asking these data of and who you're taking the data about. And so what does that really have to do with our C-TRIP study? I want to look at this one more time. I said very clearly that call center employees were taken and split into two groups randomly, working from home and not working from home. What wasn't as clear is that these call center employees all volunteered for a work from home program. So they C-TRIP asked people to participate in a work from home experiment. And then they were randomly, they had no idea this was happening. They were randomly split up into work from home and not work from home. Meaning that all the employees that signed up for the experiment wanted to work from home. So if all of a sudden half of your staff wanted to work from home and now they're told, no, you can't, but everybody else gets to, the other half of the group, like, duh, working from home group 50% less likely to leave than the people that wanted to work from home but are now forced to stay at the office for 9 months while all their friends are working from home. So there's a little bit more to this, right? We can't just take these numbers at total face value and say, oh, working from home totally works, because it doesn't all the time. Not to say that it never works, but let's take a look at IBM and what they did in terms of working from home. In 1979 in Silicon Valley, IBM had a log jam in their office mainframe. So they installed those huge green screen terminals in the homes of 5 employees to do an experiment and see how working from home went. Now, in 1979, working from home is a little bit different. The high-speed internet, the internet at all, whatever, was a little bit different. But it seemed to work anyway. By 1983, 2,000 IBM employees were doing work from home. And in 2009, IBM boasted that 40% of IBM's 386,000, it's on the screen, don't have to remember that, 386,000 employees were working from home. And this saved IBM 58 million square feet of office space, over $2 billion. I mean, there was enormous savings from having employees not have to be somewhere. Side note, they also sold their consulting service on why this was so wonderful to many other companies. So, they also made a little bit of a profit off of this. But something funny happened. In 2017, they changed their minds. They said, we actually want everyone to come into the office to work. And the question is, why? Why would they change their minds so drastically? And here's the problem. Working from home doesn't always work. And there's studies that say it's going to work. There's studies that say it's not going to work. And the data tend to talk past each other. One study that actually looks really good says that working from home works. One study that looks really good says it doesn't work at all. So what's the deal here? And the trick is, what kind of productivity are you looking for? What kind of performance are you looking for out of your employees to know whether working from home is really going to work, and whether this new age with coronavirus that especially your front line is working from home a good thing? So what do they say? What does the research say? It says that there's 2 types of productivity. There's personal productivity, which is how many sales you close. Sorry, I lost my train of thought on this. Here I am. It's how many sales you close or customer complaints you handle. Then the research on balance suggests that it's better to let people work when they want and where they want. So if it's sales, personal productivity, you individually get to do something, then it's much better. So for jobs where people really interact with clients, consultants, insurance salesmen, or ones where there's really no interaction at all, journalists, whatever, the office actually just interrupts things and makes it way worse. But you have another type of productivity. So in this personal productivity, working from home tends to work most of the time. Some more caveats we'll talk about. But there's another type of productivity, and that's called collaborative efficiency. So that's the speed at which a group solves a problem. And distance seems to drag collaborative efficiency way down. And why is the short answer is that collaboration is communication. And communications technology is, for the moment, really still at the office. Now, yeah, we have zillions of emails. We have all these sorts of things. I mean, geez, I actually feel like I'm getting less emails from people that work 12 feet away from me now that I'm home rather than when I was there. And that's really important to understand, is actually the distance of the communication. And whether that is that you're actually putting people in a group to work together, or they're sitting at a table with 12 people at a table. We'll get to that. It's going to remind you a lot of what a call center looks like. And being able to see what other people are doing and sort of the motivation of other people doing things. Or whether it's like sitting around the water cooler and, I had this really hard thing. I had this really hard customer, this really hard problem. How do I do it? And people can talk with each other about fixing things and solving and collaborating together. So let's just take a very brief example. I want you to consider what is a very tiny office. Hold on. So let's consider a very specific type of office for a simple example, an airplane simulator. Okay. It's a tiny office. Well, I mean, frankly, that simulator, it looks pretty big, but technically speaking, it's a tiny office. And they did a simulation. So they took 3 crew members and they stuffed them in there, wrapped them in all these instrument panels. And, comfort wise, it's not that fabulous. But the forced proximity really benefited crew communication. Researchers, I think it was UC San Diego and let me look at my notes, UC Irvine, demonstrated this analysis. And it was specifically the moments after one crew member diagnosed a fuel leak. Okay, so there's the other 2 crew members, there's one guy, he has now just diagnosed a fuel leak and said it. Communication, when they recorded it, is actually enacted through a series of really quick gestures at the instrument panel, some few short utterances. And it's this model of collaborative efficiency that takes 24 seconds with barely talking to each other. In the email world, the same exchange, you're trying to point at things, utter things, move things, it could take dozens of emails back and forth to be able to fix a problem like this, which, given the fact that in this situation, the fuel tank would have been emptying very quickly, is certainly not ideal. So in this case, it shows you that when you need to collaborate, when there's an efficiency aspect to it, being together is incredibly important. And not even just being together connected remotely, but actually physically together, pointing at things, talking about things. You guys can't see what I'm pointing at. Well, you can, but over there is really important. And it brings us to this question of, we've gone through this. We've talked about what works, what doesn't work. One study works, one study doesn't work. The data is telling us all the things. What's the answer? Is working from home the future? Is that what you should say the front line should do? Is that the best thing? Is that the best thing for you? Here's the answer that the research is basically saying, pretty strongly actually to me, is that halfway doesn't cut it. It's got to be all or nothing. It's working from home or not. These models where we're starting to bring people back, and everyone's feet away from each other, and all this sort of social distancing aspects, actually doesn't work. And here's why. There's a weakness. It's the data for this research is really telling us that human nature throws a big wrench into what should work, what the data should tell us is working. Back in 1977, an MIT professor, Thomas Allen, looked at communication patterns and found out that the farther apart physically people's desks were, the less likely that they were to communicate. And I mean by feet. I'm not talking like, miles or different buildings. I'm literally talking desks by feet. Most emails that you get in the office in general, like statistically speaking, are from people within 20 feet of you. What he found is that at the 30-meter mark, the likelihood of regular communication approaches 0, which is to say that if you bring back people partially, you're losing everything, right? So you're not getting the benefits of working from home, and you're not getting the benefits of this collaborative environment where people are communicating. So it's saying that halfway is actually the wrong way. It's all or nothing is the best thing for people working from home. There was one study that really sort of emphasized this, and this was Ford Motor. This was in the late 1990s, and this, if anyone has been in call centers recently, this actually highly resembles what one looks like. You have teams of tables. In this case, there were 6 to 8 employees of Ford per team, per table. And it was this sort of like experimental war room, which was arranged to maximize the team members' actual physical peripheral awareness of what others were doing. And the results were insane. The teams completed their projects, completed each of their individual works in a third of the time that it usually takes Ford employees to do. I can't remember what it was. It was some project that they were working on, all doing very different things and completing very different tasks. They completed their work in a third of the time. Not so much because they were communicating, but because they could actually physically see what someone else was doing, the motivating factor of someone else being there. It really changes things. So I guess what the sort of results are of research so far, and by far the most frequently asked question I've gotten, is that, again, halfway doesn't work. Either people work from home and they get the benefits, and there's going to be negatives too, but they get the benefits of working from home, or they don't and they come back fully to the office, fully in these collaborative environments. But that this halfway idea of having people come back and, be spread apart and physically spread apart is really the worst possible option, and the one that nothing works, because you don't get the benefits of working from home and you don't get the benefits of the collaboration. Which may not be a lot of hope at the moment, but I think it's a really important aspect as we all start to think about going back to work and how to best organize people coming back to work, especially people on the front line for customer service. These teams, again, really look like a call center to me. And what really is the best thing for the company, and what is the best thing for the customer? Because the best thing for the customer is that they get their problem resolved in a wonderful way, and that they are loyal to to the company. And if your employees are not working well, if they're in this sort of halfway situation, which we know is really not the right way to work, inevitably everything falls apart. And it's not good for your employees either. So I think that's really the biggest takeaway I've been thinking about and working on in terms of this future of work question. Thank you all so much. And any questions before you go to lunch, before you get to run off and eat?